Now, sometimes the research and advocacy of the left, it actually becomes an own goal. And what I'm going to share with you now is not so much an own goal as an army of fools that are hoisted on their own petard. Actually, it's an army of public servants and the progressive academic researchers who have been pushing for an even shorter working week. Now, the study in question took place in Iceland, and it could really be described as progressive pop news. That's the stuff I've previously called advocacy research. It's research done to confirm the long-held beliefs of the activist left, who are usually behind it. It simply acts as a cover and justification for their agenda. Think anything to do with climate change studies, for example. Do you remember the 97% of scientists bull dust? Or anything about gender bias? Or what about racism being endemic in Western society and exclusively preserved of white men? That sort of advocacy research. In this case, the long-running leftist cause has been for people to work less but get paid the same. And while they won't say this, they know that working less will give people more leisure time to spend not raising their children. Remember, they like them in institutionalised childcare, and the people can then numb their brains with substances and consume the progressive Kool-Aid that is peddled through public broadcasters. The left really do believe that a zombified nation is a more controllable one, and they want to have control. So anyway, a British NGO whose focus is on Soviet-style economic planning and a partisan Icelandic one did research over 4 years between 2015 and 2019 in the city of Reykjavik. Now, a trial was announced in response to, can you believe this, long-standing calls from grassroots organisations and unions to work less but get paid the same. Now, they did the trial, it was declared an initial success, and it was eventually expanded across the country. There were no controls, just a bunch of civil servants deciding how much less they wanted to work each week. Surprise, surprise. Most of the trialists opted out of the maximum number of hours they could, and the results of the trial were, again, unsurprisingly, declared an outstanding success. And well, this triggered the patsies in the media. They declared the 4-day work week was the future, despite there not being a 4-day work week in the trials at all. In fact, most duties were reduced by a maximum of 4 hours. Now, there were so many flaws in the study methodology that I won't bother to listen, but it is pertinent to say that this trial was only conducted across the government sector. That's right, the only people involved were a bunch of paper-pushing bureaucrats who drink almond soy lattes after workplace yoga sessions and who spend most of their time planning how to annoy the rest of us with petty gripes anyway. But this is what the report said, and I quote, "To be able to work less while providing the same level of service, changes in the organisation of work therefore had to be implemented. Most commonly, this was done by rethinking how tasks were completed, shortening meetings, cutting out unnecessary tasks, and shifts arrangements." Well, let me break that down into plain English for you. A lot of public officials actually create meaningless, looks-like work tasks for themselves rather than value for their citizenry. That means you can actually reduce the number of hours worked by public servants, and there's no measurable decline in services to the public. That's what the report found. So hooray! Let's grab onto that. Let's seize this and embrace it. And rather than cut the hours of public servants, let's cut the number of them. In 2020, this country spent $174 billion to employ more than 2 million people in the public service. That cost every full-time private sector worker the equivalent of $25,000 in taxes every single year, just to cover the public service wages, not the rent and not the other accoutrements that go with it. But now we know, thanks to a stacked study by the left, that they can easily work less and no services will suffer as a result. So, here's my plan. For the good of the country, rather than cut their work hours by 10%, let's start cutting the legions of paper pushers by that number instead. And joining me now to discuss this is the Director of Policy for the Institute of Public Affairs, Gideon Rosner. Gideon, welcome to the show. I'm waiting for you to disagree with me that we should somehow reduce the 2 million public servants who cost us $174 billion in this country. We shouldn't reduce their numbers because they do such valuable service for us.
Well, you won't find any disagreement from me, Cory. I, of course, support cutting the numbers of public servants. We do have way too many in the country. They are grossly overpaid and they're making us miserable. But you know what? I would almost, rather than getting rid of them, because if we can't do that, I would rather pay them to work one day a week. I would work half an hour a week. The point is that when they do work, they interfere with our lives so much, they actually make us miserable and they make the country poorer than actually if they'd done nothing at all. Think about it this way. We would have fewer Brett Suttons of the world working out how far we can go from our own homes. We'd have fewer climate lobbyies in the public service trying to get us into electric vehicles we don't want. There'd be fewer health bureaucrats telling us that the price of beer is too cheap or trying to take away our vapes and all sorts of other things. So, look, getting rid of them would be fine, but I'd almost settle for just paying them not to do anything at all and, have a bit of gardening leave and sit at home all day long.
You're not the first to suggest that. If it's not just about saving money, let's put them all on half-time, let them float around and spend their exorbitant salaries in the economy generally, but at least they'll be
just leave me alone.
Less nuisance in our lives. Yeah, I can get that. And you bring up this example, of course, about Victoria. I mean, how many bureaucrats are in Victoria? They got a massive pay rise last year, I think at 40% or something over the next 3 years. But it is extraordinary how at the drop of a pen or a stroke of a pen, based on health advice, you're now going to a 5-day lockdown.
Well, this is the serious element to it, Cory. The coronavirus saga has shown us the actual damage and harm that the state, through public servants and through bureaucrats, can do to its own citizens. We've seen Centrelink lines going around the block. We've seen businesses close forever. We've seen, as was written by my boss John Roscombe in the AFR today, we've seen 1 in 10 people last year during Melbourne's big lockdown say they contemplated suicide during the lockdown that happened last year. We've had babies die in utero because bureaucrats have prevented people from getting across state borders to get medical treatment. And as you rightly pointed out, these are people who are totally insulated from the cost that they are levying on the rest of us. Don't forget, Cory, private sector salaries were smashed to the tune of $6 billion during lockdowns last year. Public sector salaries went up. These are people who sit around in their ivory towers on their extortionate salaries, dreaming up ways to impoverish the rest of us. And we have to demand better, and we have to demand that the government work for us, not the other way around.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Gideon. I mean, during lockdown, business has taken a massive hit. Individuals have taken a hit. Part of that's been picked up by government with JobKeeper and JobSeeker and so forth. But those who are making these determinations, because let's not gild the lily, politicians have outsourced decision-making through the human shields called the chief health officers, and they get sacrificed at women and held up and promoted. They've had no hit to their salaries. They've had no hit to their working conditions or their long-term social security in their job. In fact, quite the opposite. The power has given them enormous influence, hasn't it?
It has. And look, let's not forget also that these so-called experts, a lot of them in the medical bureaucracies have not practiced medicine for decades, if at all. Look at somebody like that Jerome Weimar, who unfortunately, I don't think anybody could be more annoying or loathsome than Dan to watch on TV, but this Jerome Weimar bloke, never even spent any time in any health department or public health authority. He came from places like, wait for it, Public Transport Victoria. That's a well-oiled piece of government machinery if ever I've seen one. Yet this is the person dictating the health decisions of millions of Victorians right now. The problem with public servants, especially ones who come up with problems like corona or climate and so on, they have a vested interest in overstating the problem because only they can provide solutions. They have a vested interest in creating problems that only public servants can serve. So what ends up happening is we're trapped in a feedback loop where the problem is overstated. Public servants get bonuses and grants and things like that to come up with solutions. And again, the people who are losing out are people like you and me, private citizens.
Yeah, when the only tool you have is a hammer, everything you see is a nail, and that is what they see at the moment.
Correct.
You were talking about Jerome Weimar, but in South Australia we have Professor Spurrier, who was, when we had a 2019 influenza crisis and 82 people died, she told people to sneeze into their elbows. And now, when there's a fictional strain of coronavirus, which we mockingly call the pizza box strain, they lock down a whole state for 5 days. They simply cannot respond appropriately because they've got no skin in the game from a financial perspective, and there's no bark that comes off them if it gets horribly wrong.
No, that's correct. And you know, with Nicola Spurrier, I mean, I guess the most important thing is that if you go to the football, you can't catch the ball because it might be some sort of filthy corona-infested football flying around. We all remember that one as well. Look, I think we're actually worse off than we were in March last year with this coronavirus business. I mean, the way in which the commentary for the past 2 weeks from these health bureaucrats has gone, they have completely lost the plot. On the one hand, they are telling us that we need to get vaccinated, the virus is so bad, we need to go and get the jab, get the jab, get the jab. And then somebody like Jeanette Young, the next governor of Queensland, God help us, then goes completely off script and says that getting the jab is more dangerous than the virus may very well be. Now, I'm not saying she's right or wrong or anything else, but you cannot have this circular logic in which the virus is so bad that we must get vaccinated, except if you don't want to, if you shouldn't get vaccinated against the virus that's so bad, you simply have to get vaccinated. It is just a Kafkaesque bureaucratic death spiral now with no rhyme or reason or endpoint.
I agree with you, Gideon, but we can't have this stop-start nature of COVID lockdowns either. I mean, Daniel Andrews shut you guys down for whatever it was, 8 weeks to cure Victoria of coronavirus. And then, of course, as soon as it comes back, they want to start the whole process again. We're never going to get rid of this virus. Not everyone's ever going to be vaccinated. When is the time going to come? They're going to say lockdowns are clearly not working. They're destroying the economy. They're destroying people's lives. They're ruining people's mental health. And what price are these politicians prepared for us to pay so that they can influence these power policies on us?
Well, Cory, unfortunately, the narrative has now been cemented that, you know, Gladys didn't lock down early enough. Now, I've been on your show on Friday nights when we've talked in great detail about that lockdowns actually make no difference whatsoever. Countries with very strict lockdowns have actually had more people die than places like Sweden and Japan and Taiwan that didn't. But when will the political class accept that lockdowns are useless? I don't think they ever will, because, of course, they don't want to admit that what they have put us through for the better part of 18 months now has been completely unnecessary and great cost to us all. The bottom line, Cory, is this. This is no longer a health problem to the extent it ever was one. This is a political problem. This is a failure of our governing institutions to stand up for our rights and freedoms. And the only way it will end is with a political solution, is when we demand better and, as I said, demand that the government works for us.
Well, they are fighting words, Gideon Rosner, and I love to hear them. So thanks for joining me tonight on the Bolt Report, and I'll see you tomorrow night on Bernardi, I hope.
Looking forward to it, Cory. Cheers.